Welcome to another episode of the Trusted Advisor podcast and video series powered by the Retail Solutions Providers Association. Our goal on the pod is to accelerate the success of today's and tomorrow's leaders in the retail IT industry. I'm Jim Roddy, back with you again. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we talk with leaders in the retail IT channel about their leadership journeys and what they've learned along the way. In this episode, we'll talk with Brett Van Riper, a channel account manager for Epson, where he's been a member of the team for nearly 30 years. Prior to Epson, from 1992 to 1997, Brett worked for Nemax, a point-of-sale distributor, which was acquired by Ingram Micro in 2004. Brett, our paths have crossed at many industry events. Welcome to the Trusted Advisor.
Hi, Jim. Happy New Year to you. Good to see you again.
Yes, Happy New Year. So I talked about, I mentioned at the outset, we want to talk about your leadership journey. Can you talk about that and some of the roles that you've held in the channel? Because your entire career has been focused on coordinating channel companies. Can you share for our listeners and our viewers some details on your background?
Yeah, sure. I was hired back in Epson in 1997 as a as a distribution account manager, and did that for about almost 25 years, not quite 25 years, but something like that. And then I worked for I transferred over and worked with Linda Sutter for about the last 7 years as a channel account manager. And that group is led by Mike DeGiebert now because Linda retired. But I've been with Epson almost 30 years, be 30 years in September of this year. And then before that, I worked for in the channel for Nemax. People probably remember Nemax out of Livonia, Michigan. And I did that for about 5 years. And then for a short period of time, if people really want to claw back, there was a Radio Shack Business Systems did Synchronix POS systems way back when, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail a little bit in our other conversations. But that was really where I started in POS.
Very interesting. And who were some of the distributors that you worked with over the years?
Almost all of them.
Okay.
So I have a 20-year relationship with ScanSource. I had Metropolitan for a good chunk of that, maybe 15 years. I did Nemax for a little while after the emotions settled down a little bit. I had Nemax. I did PC4 back in the day. I started them. Agilysys was with us. I didn't really ever work directly with Blue Star, but I am good friends with a lot of people there. Mark Fraker and I go way back to my Nemax days, and Steve Kuntz was a dear friend of mine.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed the crew over there.
Yeah, and folks who don't know, PC4 was actually owned and operated by the RSPA. It was like a commercial branch of it, and then eventually got scooped up by ScanSource. So I think, as distributors rose, and you can tell me because you were there on the front lines of it, as the role of distributors increased, it was like, hey, our association is like competing with us. I don't know if you have any stories on that in terms of, and really how sales through the channel really became more important over time. And, we're going to dive in a little bit more how distributors played a role with that. But is that how you remember the whole PC4 thing from back in the day?
Yeah, it's so the relationship. So the PC4, was an evolution of the ICRDA Part Center.
Yes.
So one of the things that the ICRDA did was they got the resellers and the dealers educated on servicing product.
Mm-hmm.
and dealing with the back end. And those that got involved in that business found out that was very lucrative, and it also tied them into the end user quite a bit because they became a more reliable source for the end user because of their skill set in fixing bad equipment. So that's one of the real key things that the ICRDA did for their members is train their back end. Mm-hmm. and then provide them an access for parts. So one of the evolutions there was, we'll get into this a little later too, but as the POS business broke away from being a system business to a component business. Um, the the thought on the ICRDA side was, let's become a distributor. Let's become, let's bring on some of these components along with the parts and start being a full service distributor.
Yep.
Oh, that
Yep.
kind of went that only went so well. But it went for a while.
Yes. And that's where I learned PC and part PC4 came from Part Center, and it was like the fourth warehouse that they had. So they rolled it up from there. So all right. So very interesting. So thank you for sending that background. And so during our discussion, we're going to connect what happened in the channel historically to events today, because there's a lot that we can learn from past events, right? It might not be identical, but there's a lot of philosophy and business best practices that tie in together. So can you talk about the most important channel trend from the 1990s and the 2000s? There was a shift from dealers representing just one brand to resellers who were becoming more autonomous and building custom solutions. So can you expand upon that for our listeners and viewers about that whole transition?
Yeah, that really was the 90s. So if you think about it, this I see you're wearing the RSPA shirt, and that's Retail Solution Provider Association, right?
Mhm.
And that organization was actually the convergence of the ICRDA and
Mhm.
the SDA. So the ICRDA and the SDA both have a common letter in it, which was D for dealer.
Mhm.
And so that's what happened. So whether it was an NCR, what you had is these POS companies that they were dealers back in the 90s.
Yes.
And they were dealers of NCR, they were dealers of IBM, they were dealers of Data Checker. They were dealers of, they would be a dealer. Casio, they were, like they were cash register dealers. And so if you think about their names back then, they were all, CRS of Fort Wayne or CRS of
Correct.
Kalamazoo or CRS of,
Or
and then oh
Micros, and then whatever the location is. Yeah.
yeah, and then the DCR, data cash register. So they were all selling cash register systems. And then in the 90s, the platforms started to open up. The software became the key to the solution. So it was more of a business operations software as opposed to a cash register that was handling transactions. And so that's really what the 90s was all about. And as that happened, the dealers changed to solution providers. They became, and we talked a little bit about this. They became more in control of their future,
Yes.
as opposed to being like a car dealer. Like Ford was kind of captive on whatever Ford brought out, right? And GM. Well, the cash register dealers evolved into the, point of sale business operation people, and they began to shop these software packages, and then actually the component business kind of broke up at that time. So when you look at it, like like you would have this NCR system that would have a flatbed barcode scanner and an integrated keyboard and an integrated receipt printer and that type of thing, right? Well, during the 90s, everything broke out. And so you'd get companies like Percon and Spectrophysics and Symbol. They would control, or Metrologic, they handled the barcode part of the business. And Citizen and Star and Epson started dealing with the receipt printer part of it. And then you had like Cherry and Unitech handling the keyboard part of it, right? And doing the cut. So things became more uh, um, a la carte. And so what could happen is that the dealers could bring a more unique, specialized offering to their end users, and they became more autonomous.
Yeah, so instead of just which of our cash registers that we offer do you want, they could put together a custom solution because they could say, it's going to work best for you, the Cherry keyboard, right, the Epson receipt printer, things of that nature. And it seems like it helped the dealer then become a literal systems provider or a solution provider, and they could be way more customer focused? And is
It,
that kind of like that was part of the underlying transition as well? They could serve the customer better, but they also had to raise their level of expertise, right? Because they weren't just selling, 10 different things. The options became almost limitless.
yeah, that's true. And the focus actually became more on the software and became more on the training. So the software ended up touching more of the operation than the transactional part of it. Cash registers were somewhat limited to the transaction accounting area of the business, whereas when the software came around, it encompassed that, but also brought the back end of the business to the front, and it integrated everything, right? And so the dealers, the solution providers had to become much more fluent in the operation of the businesses. And that's where they became so valuable actually to the end users.
Yes, yes. For sure, yeah, because they could actually act as a trusted advisor for them and a counselor on it.
Yeah.
What did it do from a pricing standpoint? Like, did it go from you were paying the same amount, or was it less? Was it more from a merchant standpoint and from what the resellers were offering?
That was something that evolved over time. I
Okay.
mentioned my little time at Synchronix, in Radio Shack. Back then, you had memory chips and stuff like that were, $150 or $125, and the hard drive was, $500, right? For nothing, for not even a megabyte, right? And so, you know, in the 90s, that stuff, you might have looked at a register and actually looked at the price tag being much, much cheaper. But then as we rolled into like the 2000s and things like that, things started dropping dramatically. Like we talked about these components, and even like used to have these big TV sets for, remember the microtouch ELO battles, resistive, capacitive and stuff like that. That that pricing model just dropped dramatically. PCs dropped dramatically once we got into the 2000s. And so when that happened, um, then the change wasn't so difficult. You know, they knew the benefits by then. They knew this, bringing the back part of the office and integrating it with the front part of the office and having it all operating under one system was beneficial. But it was in the 90s, it was kind of expensive and it was kind of cumbersome.
Hmm.
But the better the software got, the more encompassing the software got, and the better the components got, everything got cheaper and everything got a lot better, a
Yes,
lot better.
yes. And
And
that maybe is a lesson for today where you see something that comes out new and somebody's like, well, the price point of it is too high. But hey, over time, like the functionality is really what matters. And if it's serving the merchant, eventually that price point could come down exponentially, I guess. Or am I trying to, you know, tie two things
no,
together that shouldn't be tied together?
yeah, and I deal with, Epson. I'm not, we stake our claim on reliability,
Yeah.
and it in most of these areas, most guys that deal in these areas, particularly in the hospitality business, it's a disaster, and it's very tough on technical, on equipment.
Yeah.
And so reliability becomes a much greater thing to look at over time. And you know, for people that have been in the business a long time, I'm talking about end users that have been, yes, they want to make their starting point as low as possible, but what overrides most of that is, hey, I want good, solid equipment. And a lot of times that comes with history, with, a particular vendor and that type of thing. And so, yeah, they try and push price, but it's not that. It's they want to make sure that they're very confident in the service that they, have purchased with with the system. And then also just the general reliability of the equipment.
Yeah.
That is, for smart business owners, that is more paramount than the the cost.
Yep. Yep. And just, a service the RSP offers to a lot of our VARs and ISVs is that we do merchant surveys on their behalf, right? We help them put their survey together so we get to see the results of it. And what we see is if your software, hardware, if everything you provide is reliable, that makes everything else great. Because even if you have wonderful customer service, but if they have to jump in too many times, right? These merchants do not want to be hanging out with your customer service team fixing problems. They want it to be super, super reliable. So, and so tying in with that, so I'm hoping you can talk, Brett, about the importance of VARs and solution providers remaining independent today and the important that they have that autonomy. Like you chose the word D in ICRDA and SDA system dealers. The thing that I go back to is I always say the first word in the history of the RSP was independent cash register dealers association. And RSP board past chair Jeff Riley from Retail Management Hero, he refers to our community as a quote mesh network of independent entrepreneurs. Can you talk about the importance of, you talked how solution providers went away from being a dealer of one to being able to be independent. How important is that in today's channel?
Well, it's very important for a lot of different reasons. So it's very important for an end user so that they can get an opportunity to see everything that's out there. See the broad spectrum, get a professional's view of what has worked well in the marketplace, right? On the partner or on the dealer side or the solution provider side, it's more about bringing the best equipment to play for the end user, but more importantly, they also control their finances on that, right? So once they create the demand, I look from an Epson side, as a vendor, who's creating the demand? Who really is making the end user, purchase whatever? It's that demand creation thing comes with profitability, right? If you're helping that end user make the decision on what product that they want, you should be rewarded for that. If I'm telling you what to sell to an end user as a vendor, you shouldn't make as much money, right? Because I'm doing all that. I'm bringing you the end user, that type of thing. But if you're out there creating the opportunities, you should be in control of the margin, and
Yes.
which should be beneficial to you. So I hope that kind of answered your question there a little bit. There's a two-way street there. There's the benefit to the end user to be able to look at a broader spectrum of product. And
Yes,
then
it reminds me, I won't mention the name of the vendor, but this is many years ago where they introduced a product and the entire system, like the margin on it was $9 a month. And so I remember some, resellers saying, well, that's terrible. Like I can't make a living that way if I do it. But if all they did was they were only a dealer for that one vendor, then they'd be out of luck. But because they could then, I'll just go buy, I'll go resell something that's better and I can actually make money at it. That kind of sounds like what you're saying is that independence gives them the latitude to actually have a living if they want.
yeah, and that's a good thing. You do want your people to actually make money that are out there working, because otherwise you end up with other problems.
That is true. But some have learned that the hard way, right? You and I have been around the channel long enough. There's a whole bunch of folks who think if I just throw a pittance, right, to one, to my reseller channel, that's going to keep them happy. But that's not really what it is. If you want to get really good resellers, you got to make sure they can make margin on your product. It's got to open new doors and provide them a margin, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly.
It's absolutely, and again, if you're bringing something to an end user that is beneficial to their business, they'll pay the tab. The idea is, why discount it before you find out the value? And there is a lot of value in buying leverage in the marketplace in regards to the margin that you provide your dealers.
Yes.
That if they can make money off of what you're trying to do in the marketplace, that will benefit you as a vendor or a software company
Yes.
tremendously.
Yeah.
Even if they make more money than you could have possibly imagined, that's still a good, that's still a really good thing for the vendor.
Right.
It
And
buys
yeah.
leverage.
Yep. And if you're hiring salespeople, you could pay them a very little bit, but they're going to go work for somebody who's actually going to pay them, right? The best ones are going to move on and move away from you.
That's usually the way it rolls.
Though again, many have tried the other way, and then they learn the hard way. It doesn't work for you long term. So, um, let's talk about distributors a little bit more. We touched on it. Can you talk from your vantage point about the importance that you saw distributors play? Really building up the channel and how they have helped and continue to help VARs become and stay independent today in the channel.
Yeah, probably one of the most key things for everybody. If you look at a lot of dealers or solution providers, business operations isn't one of their, you know, real qualities, so to speak, as a business.
Hmm.
Lots of them are not operated um, the most efficient way you possibly can. You can't be a distributor, a national distributor like Blue Star ScanSource or your Metropolitan MS Cash. They're very efficient businesses, very, very efficient, very impressive. And so what they're able to do is they're able to, coordinate the back end of a business. They're able to organize the equipment, the different vendors and that type of thing. They are, you know, able to provide probably very flexible credit lines, unlike Epson does. Epson's kind of tight. So the distributors will work with on the financial part of it, the accounting part of it. They will also help everybody with their merchandising and marketing. Distribution is three components. It's this warehouse, it's sales, and then it's merchandising. Out of the merchandising, they do marketing, but merchandising is one of the most important things that um, the distributor brings to market, and they're very good at it. And they leverage. They not only leverage a bunch of vendors, they leverage all of these resellers, right? And then they bring efficiency into the picture, and it works very, very well, very, very well. And
Yeah.
it was a great thing. The distributors are a great thing for the resellers. They're even probably a better thing for vendors, because they penetrate the market. Our distributors are so responsible for our reseller base. So responsible. They are they are more than 50% are responsible for developing our partner program, for finding new resellers, for expanding us into different vertical markets. Because everybody knows the hospitality market, they know the grocery market, they know the retail market. But what about the hospital market? What about the financial market? That type of thing. The distributors have explored almost all of those markets for us,
Hmm.
and they do it with multiple vendors, right? And so they can penetrate a market much easier than me just going at it like with receipt printers.
Right.
They're going at it with all kinds of technology equipment and components. So they
Yeah.
provide a tremendous value to the whole market area.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of folks focus on as you said, the efficiency and the logistics, and like that's keeping costs down by centralizing it. But they help with exposure. And so you and I talked, when we prepared for this conversation today, and you said something, I wrote it down where you said Epson was not really successful until you were on the distributor shelves. Can you talk about why you say that? Like, did it make you 5% more successful? Was it, multiples of that? I
It,
guess if you can
it's
kind of paint that picture for folks, that'd be great.
I fight this internally all the time. Um, we, you know, we are well positioned. Our brand is is very well recognized, very well respected.
Yes.
And it's because of our, our consumer printers, our project, we're out there. But the other thing we are is we're a component-based business. We're not a solution provider, and particularly in point of sale. We sell a component to a system. And so when you look back at the late 90s or 2000s, there weren't a lot of end users looking for receipt printers. They were looking for point of sale systems,
Hmm.
right? And so our evolution and our success was almost all driven through either OEMs, because we had really good OEMs that integrated our printers in their solutions, or the distribution channel. And the distribution channel is the one that introduced us to it. Other could have been other solution providers, could have been the software companies, could have been resellers, but the distributors were paramount in that. Much more than 50%.
Wow. And so it's like the distributors gave you the opportunity to be part of the total solution, right? As opposed to, a merchant or, just say a chain would have to work with a whole bunch of different vendors. They're able to go to one solution provider and the distributor is able to give them all the choice, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Yeah, and they were very familiar with the idea that they were convinced that our reliability and our performance was going to be a benefit to those people. So they
Yeah.
weren't just doing it just to serve their own needs. They were actually doing it as a benefit to the people they were talking to. They
Yeah.
knew it.
Yeah.
And I take Epson out of that picture. You take Symbol, right? You take Zebra, back in the day. Those were very good, reliable brands and products. And they could bring them into areas where they weren't done as a direct company, right?
Hmm.
They did it through the reseller channel at that particular time in a lot of situations. And of course, it was a big benefit to the vendors.
Yeah. So you've raised some things. I have two follow-up questions for you, but I'll separate them. The first one is about ISVs. So I think we've added a lot of ISVs to the RSPA community, and oftentimes when they say, "Hey, we'd like to partner with resellers or partner with other ISVs to do APIs," and we're like, "Hey, let's talk about connecting with some of the distributors," and they're like, "Well, we don't do hardware, and so I don't know why we would work with the distributors." Can you, I guess, shed some light on that in terms of distributors have a lot of ISVs that they work with as well? That seems to be like a foreign concept because distributors are helping put together that whole solution. I guess, can you talk about that from your perspective, working in the channel, working for a hardware company, but how important ISVs and distributor and that whole mix is together?
Very, very important. And again, it does. So I have three that ISVs that were very influential in my career. There was a company called Infogenesis that now is known as Agilicis. They're in the gaming and resort area. The other one, very, very important, right from the very beginning, was PosiTouch.
Hmm.
It's part of Shift 4 now. And then the other one is Digital Dining.
Hmm.
And Digital Dining is part of Heartland or Global Payments.
Yep.
These guys, the reason I mentioned that, Infogenesis not as much, but Digital Dining and PosiTouch were dealer based. They sold some direct, but they were both very coordinated dealer based ISVs, and it was very good. And they only had like they bought a little direct, receipt printers, but what they did is they certified our products and recommended them and said these are the only ones that are in our support program. So again, that led to tremendous sales through the distribution channel. And so whether it was direct for purchases, I'll get to the distribution point. The distributors understood that this, regardless of whether the ISV was going to buy product or just lead product their way. It was going to lead to opportunities for the distributors to grow their business because the software was going to sell and the hardware needed to be purchased. And whether they did it directly with the dealers or whether they did it with the company themselves. And then the company changing, Heartland has changed a little bit their format. And I think they're changing it back. So, sometimes, they went to, ASP model where it was all monthly based and it was, in coordination. That's another story. We'll talk about the credit card influence in our world. But just to get back, the distributors' best friend were ISPs. Whether they were a direct purchaser of equipment or they just created the opportunities. They've always done a very good job of maintaining those relationships. And again, they will provide the introduction with resellers that are looking to get in whatever area of specialty that ISV is in.
Yeah. So a lesson for our ISVs that are listening, one is don't be like, not distributors. I don't need that. And also don't say, because a lot of them are like, I don't care what hardware my stuff is put on. Like it's got to be, like you said, reliable. It's got to have a good brand in front of it, and has to be something that the resellers want to offer as well and make margin on. So you've got to make sure, don't just focus on your software component, focus on the partnering component. And that leads to my second follow-up. And you brought up earlier, like everybody knows Epson, right? Epson has a brand name. I mean, you got, Shaquille O'Neal, right? You got, a broad, everybody knows who that is. So like, why are you still active in the channel community? Why are you active in the RSPA community? Like, why do you continue to do that today, even though Epson has that brand? I'm just curious from your perspective, what's the value of still being part of the community and playing a role as a sponsor and very active?
Well, I don't. So I won't speak. I'll speak for Brett Van Riper personally.
Sure.
All right. I have now. It's been a long time since I've had to really sell product. My entire career for a long time now is just been developing relationships, and and I can tell you that a good share of them have evolved from my association with the ICRDA, with SDA, with RSPA, and those relationships are paramount to the partnership, as opposed to the product line. The product line everybody's already sold on, right? But it's the idea that I have become a valuable partner. They can rely on me to do things for them that they might need to get done. And so that's why we stay involved. And do I really want to, get in a plane and go to, South Dakota or Oklahoma? Or would I rather go to an RSPA event and, get my opportunity to see them face to face? And so that's why we stay involved, so that I can, we can stay and, get a chance to meet and greet and make sure that everything's good. That type of thing.
Got it. No, thank you for that. That's, again, I was curious because there's the brand, there's a reputation, but it seems like you've got to keep going on and on. Like you said, for those relationships, you can't neglect those because your brand will carry you so far, but the relationships will get you all the way there, is what it sounds like.
Yes, it's more that as time evolves. I mean, T88s have been around for 25 years, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing to me. I'm getting close to retirement, and that product and the U220, they've been around. You can't find products that have been around that long. Now we've obviously, we've changed our Roman numeral behind the model number to do some product improvements and that type of thing, but they're the same models.
Yep.
And so you can only sell that so much. It's the relationship with Epson that's important. And, and more importantly, the relationship with me.
Very good. Well, we're glad you're involved. And for those who aren't familiar with the RSPA, let's pause here to let our listeners and viewers know about the Retail Solution Providers Association. It's North America's largest community of retail technology VARs, software providers, vendors, and distributors in the retail, restaurant, and grocery verticals. To accelerate your success through an RSPA membership, email membership@gorspa.org. Also, we want to thank these channel-focused companies who support the RSPA community and make this podcast and video series possible. Our gold sponsors are Blue Star, CoCard, Global Payments, Order Counter, ScanSource, and company Brett is familiar with, Epson. And finally, want to make sure everybody knows to save the date for Retail Now 2026, the Retail IT Channel's #1 trade show, education conference, and networking event. This year's event is set for July 26th through 28th at the new Caesars Forum Convention Center in Las Vegas. For more information, visit gorspa.org/retail now. Retail now is where the industry meets. So, Brett, we've only got a few minutes left, like maybe 10 minutes or so. I want to ask, when you and I are preparing for this interview, you said something that really stuck with me. And so this is the quote as I wrote it down. You said, POS is driven by Main Street, not Park Avenue. Main Street is small businesses working with each other to serve customers, while Park Avenue creates monster companies right away. I'm curious, can you expand upon that? Because the channel is definitely way more Main Street than Park Avenue.
Yeah, and that's the core of the RSPA. That RSPA members own Main Street. They build, they're the ones that are going to the coffee shops and every day, or the local hardware stores, and that's where most everybody starts. Your McDonald's and and your In-N-Outs, and they all started from Main Street. They all started at, the pizza places, the Hungry Howie's, the Little Caesars. They all started on Main Street, and then they got more and more popular, and their local cash register or solution provider helped them grow, and they grew with them and that type of thing. So that's where it all is. And then of course they start becoming regional, and then they become, super regional, and then they become national. And that's the way most people do. And then as the stock market and everything grows and investment companies get into play, then some of them just start on Wall Street, right? They like, oh no, this hamburger joint, we're going to open up 200 this year. They're going to jump the shark, right? And just get in. So, and those are most of those companies will deal directly. I'm not going to name names of those type of companies because I might get myself in trouble internally, but they deal with us directly, right? The big high, capital companies that are opening up 200 and 300, 400 stores a year and jumping the ship a little bit, they deal with the manufacturers direct, usually. And then, but the other people, the majority of everybody grows out of Main Street. And Main Street is where the RSPA members are servicing business.
Yep. And that's where a lot of the innovation takes place as well, right? A lot of the trying, testing, measuring is happening in the independent space.
Oh yeah. I mean, you talk about different things like like kitchen display systems, they did start, at the highest high. They started at the guy that got tired of, he shouldn't have, but he got tired of looking at the piece of paper on the grill, right? And I wanted a kitchen display. But and then all those little test projects, they start at the smaller end. And then all of a sudden it works and somebody sees it and they say, yay, I've seen this work.
Yeah.
But most all those projects started at the smaller end.
Yep. I always tell the story of Will Atkinson from CAP retail who got bought by POS Nation. His dad founded the business, and the way that he did it was he ran a boat supply store, and he was technically savvy. And so to get boat parts, he built a computer inventory system. And so you can imagine the kind of people who are buying boat parts, right? There are a lot of business owners, and they would be like, I'd like to get a boat part. He'd go over his computer, like, what is that? What are you doing there? And that's how Cap Retail started, as they started doing applications for all sorts of other folks. But again, it starts with one boat supply store on, somewhere in Texas or wherever that was. So, Brett, so we've talked a lot about the history of the industry. I want to ask you, like, based on your experience and everything that you see today, what do you think the future holds for the retail IT channel? And then what actions should we take as an industry, as a community, to ensure the best future possible for the channel?
Well, I mentioned one of the things that there's a couple things. It's I see the end user marketplace is changing, becoming very Costco, Amazon-like, or I'm sure you've seen Buc-ee's.
Yes.
Now all of a sudden we have superstores that are gas stations, right?
Yes.
And so everything's getting you know, bigger. Uh, they have to have an environment. You think about like Dick's Sporting Goods taking over, you know, being a sporting goods store, right?
Sure.
No
Yep.
longer just, it's experiential. So the end user marketplace is evolving, changing, becoming, and the good thing is there's a lot of components and electronic devices and things that are going to need to be used in there to manage, as an Epson person, projectors come into play right now as where we're placing printers. And then also, we have multiple different receipt print or report printers and that type of thing that are going to come into play. So that provides some um, excitement, I guess, for the future. Um, on our side, or on the business side of things, on the point of sale side, credit card companies are becoming very interesting. They're buying a lot of point of sale space um, to sell more credit card transactions. And some people are going to benefit from that, and some people are not. So that one, I'm not quite sure that's a total 100% positive. Um, again, they're a transaction-based company, and their idea of a reliable product may not be as important to the end user as the end user thinks it is. So I'm not positive, but I definitely see that as an evolution, is that the credit card part of the transaction is taking a much more prevalent place in the point of sale transaction area. And I'm not positive that that's great, but it is what's happening.
Well, it seems like the market will figure it out. Like that's kind of what we've seen. And so sometimes folks have said, right, these credit card companies and they come with a lower end solution. And I just remember that when that first came out, a lot of people are like, I'm not going to sell that solution. But they're like, the solution, like we talked about earlier, the solution is going to get better, right? It's going to get more reliable as they invest more time into it. So it seems like finding that right sweet spot that serves the customer, serves that end user, and also serves the solution provider as well. We'll figure it out over time.
It should evolve, yes.
Yeah. What last question for you? And I want to close with a leadership question. So you talked about, you said you're near retirement. You talked about, your history. Who are some leaders you looked up to as mentors and really have helped shape your career? Like, who are they and what did they do? What did they say that's had a lasting impact on you, Brett?
Well, that's I saw your question, and it's so I'm a work to live guy. I think there are two people. So that means that I work to make a living
Hmm.
as opposed to living to work. So the people that I have noticed that I've been impressed with in this organization are people that are very interested in their personal and family life. And so when I think about people like that, I think about Um, guys like Art Julian. I don't know if you're familiar with Art with
Yeah, from
CBS.
CBS North Star. Yep.
Yeah, and his son Jeremy
Yep.
Julian, and then Win Platt and Brian Pedraza.
Yep.
Uh,
From
there's a
RDS.
yeah, there's Brian Mayfield from Techredation. These are people that run very, very successful businesses. Very, their businesses are loaded with family-oriented environments within their own business, right? They care about their people, they care about their business, but more importantly, they care about their personal time and running, not letting their business run their life.
Hmm.
And on a professional person, the person I've been most impressed with um, is probably Mike Bauer.
The CEO of ScanSource.
Yeah, he brought an idea to the point of sale industry that I can tell you probably even on the vendor side, 1 in 10 believed it was going to be successful. And he steamrolled this entire segment. He brought this capability that, this leveraging of, different vendors and the leveraging of the resellers. And the thing that I got to see from the inside out is he ran his organization. He did things inside their organization where not only were his employees killing it financially, they were having a great time doing it. He never didn't take a moment to stop, sales activities to let a vendor, do an activity inside that made his people feel good, whether it was a barbecue or, I did a Christmas party there. But he was always supportive of the environment within the company, um, being very positive. And that's me. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm like I said, I'm more into the relationships than I have been in the sales activity that I've done. And I have a lot of good friends in this area.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. And to close on that is, I actually just met with a vendor yesterday and was talking about that. They had a new leadership person take over, and we were talking about, their involvement with the RSP over the past 25 years, and they were talking about doing more sponsorships. And I was like, you know what? We can take your money, like that'd be great, but boy, the people, like I said, just looking back on what your organization has done, it's the people and their involvement in lifting up other people. That's what really makes a difference. Again, I don't say that to our sponsors to be like, and don't spend any money on it, just hang out. But it's got to be both. And that's what it seems like is a lesson here in the channel. You don't go from I have a business to I'm going to close more business. You've got to build those meaningful relationships along the way to help the other person, not just to help yourself. That's really what it sounds like is saying. You're saying is the folks who've had a lasting impact on you, they care about other people first, and then the bottom line's coming next, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah. Epson's paid a lot of bills for me in
Hmm.
my life, but the relationships that the company's provided me is what lasts. That's the important part.
Very well said. Very well said. Well, that does it for this episode of The Trusted Advisor. If you enjoyed our discussion, be sure to subscribe to the RSP YouTube channel and the Trusted Advisor podcast so you never miss an episode. Before we go, big thanks again to Brett Van Riper for sharing his wisdom with us today. Thanks also to RSP Marketing Director Chris Arnold for his production work, Joseph McDade for our music, and last but not least, thanks so much to you for listening. Our goal at the RSP is to accelerate the success of our members in the retail technology ecosystem by providing knowledge and connections. For more information, please visit our website at gorspa.org. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, everybody.